Hi guys, thanks for joining me today. I'm Marilyn and my channel's Making with Marilyn. Now I do all things crafty, but on today's video I'm going to take this Dollar Tree cutting board. It's a glass cutting board that you can get at the Dollar Tree. They come in square and round. And I'm going to try to use the vinyl and sublimation hack, except that this time I'm going to use vinyl and Cricut Infusible ink. Now, I've done a couple of videos on these before, and I've always used sublimation. Well, a viewer asked me, can you do that with Cricut Infusible ink? Now, I think it'll work, but as I've really sat down and thought about this process, I'm wondering if it really will, and I'll explain why as we go along. But whether this turns out good or a flop, I'm going to show you. So some things that I'll use besides my glass cutting board, I'm going to use this Oracal 651 vinyl. This is a permanent vinyl. It's an adhesive vinyl. Now I've had people say they've used other things. I never have, but the Oracal 651 has worked very well with my sublimation cutting boards. Now, if you're interested in seeing the sublimation process, I'll put a link to a video in the video description here. That one turned out beautiful, and I kind of go step by step. So check that out if you want to try this with sublimation. So other things I'm going to use, I have a couple of types of Cricut Infusible ink. This is Rapid Tack. Now this is what some people use to apply decals, like decals to car windows, things like that. You don't have to use the wet method, you can use the dry method. If you use the wet method, I've heard people say they use water and just a little bit of dish soap. I really like this. I'm going to use some alcohol, this little scraper tool, and then this squeegee. Now other things, I have a Teflon sheet, some butcher paper, some paper towels. In addition, I'm going to use Cricut Design Space and my Cricut cutter. Now I've already cut my things out, and in a minute I'm going to have to remove these feet, but I want to briefly tell you how this process works, at least how it works with sublimation. What you do is you take your adhesive vinyl and you apply it to the back side of the trivet. So it's sticky side against the trivet, but for now I'm going to set it down like this so you can see what I'm doing. You adhere the vinyl to your trivet. After you've done that, usually it's sublimation paper, goes on the bottom of it. As you heat it, it magically comes up through the vinyl and you see it from the top side. You're going to understand that a whole lot better when you see the process. Okay, so I'm starting by removing these feet. Now these feet aren't on there all that super well. I mean, they're going to stay put, but you can easily scrape these off. In fact, I can easily pull these off with my fingers. I say easily, not quite easily, but I can get them off. Okay, then I'll set these aside because I might choose to put these back on after I'm done with this. So here's where the alcohol comes in. I want to try to clean this goo that's left over once you take those off from the back of this trivet or cutting board. And what I've found is the alcohol will remove a decent amount of it, but I typically go into the kitchen sink and use some dish soap and warm water to remove the rest. Now you definitely want to get all that off, and you can feel it on there. Like I can barely feel any here. I have more over here, so I am going to take this to the kitchen and make sure I get all that gooey, sticky stuff off. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I cleaned that off. Now, once again, the top side is the rough side. The bottom side that the feet came off of, that's the smooth side. Now, this next step is a little bit controversial because some people say that Rapid Tack is just a waste of money. You can do the same thing with water and a little bit of dish soap. I've used the Rapid Tack, been really happy with it, so I'm going to stick with it. So the first time you use it, or your first layer, you're supposed to put it on and just clean it back off. Now they actually tell you to do this twice, but since I just cleaned it off with alcohol and soap and water, I'm just going to clean it off once. So the second time, I'm just going to go ahead and spray some on the back of my trivet. And I'm making sure to get little bits of it across the whole thing. I didn't put a ton on, but I put enough on. Okay, so then I'm going to peel my vinyl off that backing and I can lay this down. Now what the rapid tack does is, or a wet method in general is, it makes it where you can move this around even after you put it on your glass. So I've set it on my glass and it's easy to reposition, unlike if you use just a dry method. If you just set it down on that glass, it's going to be really hard to maneuver it around. So I'm just going to kind of slide it up to where I think it goes. If you've ever tried to put vinyl on one of these without using the wet method, if you try this way, you are going to love it. It is so much easier, so much less frustrating, and in the end, you do not get those little air bubbles. So this is where the squeegee comes in. You start in the middle, squeegee out, and it's going to push all that liquid out. And you want to push all that excess liquid out. I'm going to turn it around and go the other direction. And I do not see a single air bubble under that. Now I don't want to transfer any of that rapid tack to this side of the vinyl, so I'm just going to kind of dry going from the inside out. Okay, so this is ready. Now I can feel that the bottom of it's kind of wet because I did move it around on my cutting board or my chopping mat while I was doing this, and some of the rapid tack was on that. All right, so let me dry my hand off, and I'm just going to dry this side too. Now once again, because I tend to get a lot of questions on this method, the top side is up, the vinyl is on the bottom smooth side, and it is adhered down to the bottom. Now the next step is go ahead and put this under the heat press. I'm going to use 385 and I'm just going to press it for 15 seconds. And I'm going to have the vinyl on the bottom. My heat press is going to come down on the top. Now while I'm waiting for that to heat up, let me tell you what I did was I used my Cricut to cut the vinyl out, and I cut it at 7.7 inches, which is just a little bit smaller than the overall size of the cutting board. The other thing I did, since the corners of this cutting board are just slightly rounded, I also rounded the edges of my vinyl. Okay, so for the rest of the process, anytime I heat this, I'm going to go ahead and take the camera to the heat press so you can see it. Now this is extremely hot, so I have to let that cool off for about, I'm going to guess 10 minutes. I'll come back and check it in 10 minutes, see if it's cool enough. If you tried to put your infusible ink on it now, I think your infusible ink would just start coming through before you get it set to exactly where you want it. So I want this thing cooled off before I do that. All right, I let this cool all the way down, and this next part's the part I'm really not sure if it's going to work. I feel like I need to take the backing off this infusible ink, that if I leave it, this is under there for so long at a high heat, I don't know how it's going to turn out. So I'm not sure what to do here. Now, what I do know is that regardless of what I do, I need to put these together on one layer. And so with infusible ink, it is super easy to weed. You basically just pull it up. Now, if you have tiny little details, sometimes that can be an issue. Now I'm weeding the H off because I'm going to put it here. Typically when you're weeding infusible ink, you're pulling the outside off, but again, you're just pulling it up. It's really very easy to weed. It's just a different style than with, say, HTV. All right, so for now I'm going to go ahead and take this off and add it to this backing. I'm very, very torn as to whether to leave this on the backing or not. Because when you do this with sublimation, you just have paper, you don't have a carrier sheet. So regardless of which way we go, it's going to fit inside like this. Okay, I think I've convinced myself to go ahead and take all of it off the backing. Ah, I tore it. It'll be okay. You're never going to know that happened. Okay, so I'm going to lay this down on my butcher paper. And under my butcher paper, just to add more protection to my pressing mat, I have a Teflon sheet. I'm going to place this right inside. And then the difficult part is you can't see through this anymore. So that's why I made this outside piece just a tiny bit bigger than this. All right, so I would not do any little detail things because you're not going to see if they're in the right place. Now, if you decide to try to leave them on the backing or the carrier sheet, let me know how it turns out. I'd be really curious to know. All right, here we go. I'm good here. When I put this on the heat press, I'm going to put another piece of butcher paper on top, and then my heat press has a Teflon sheet just attached to it. So we're going to carry this whole thing over and see how this works out. All right, we're going to try this at 385 for 90 seconds. Then after that, we'll take a look at it. It's probably not going to be done after 90 seconds, but we'll still take a little peek at it. Now, so far, I think this looks great. What I need to do now is let this cool off. It's extremely, extremely hot. So I need to let that cool off and then see how well the paper comes off the back. If you happen to have watched my prior videos on this cutting boards, you know that I found a paper with help of YouTubers that peels off pretty easily. The other papers I tried, I had to actually soak them and kind of rub the paper off. So I'm very curious to see how this Infusible ink transfer sheet comes off. Now, just so it'll cool off a little bit faster, I'm going to take it off this hot pad and slide it over here onto this ceramic tile. All right, that's cooled off plenty. Now this is very pretty. I think the H would have been even prettier if it was in red, but this is nice. So this next step is probably the step that's given me the most angst in this process. and that's to see if that paper comes off easily. So let's see what we have. Okay, so just like a lot of sublimation papers, this is going to require some soaking to get off. Now, despite that little setback, and that is typical with a lot of sublimation papers, it did turn out super, super cute. That's nice. It's vibrant. I really think this is a sweet little trivet or cutting board. So let me grab some water and I'll show you how I get this backing off. Now, I wouldn't typically do it this way. I would just take it to the sink, work on it there, but I want you to see this. All right, I'm going to let this soak for a little bit, but you can kind of see right here already. This is the vinyl, and this is where the paper starts. So you let it soak for a while, and then you can roll the paper off. I think if I just let that soak in there for maybe 5 minutes, that's probably going to come off pretty easily. All right, so I waited at least 5 minutes, and this is coming off really easily. That is good news. Now the paper's in layers, and so it looks like I'm going to have to wait just a little bit longer once I get part of that paper off, but that's okay. Look at that. All right, now I have all the paper backing off. That's the back side. That even looks cute. But look at this front side. That is adorable. So if you don't have a sublimation printer, you do not have to shy away from this project. You can use the Cricut Infusible ink. Such a fun discovery. So if you try this project with Cricut Infusible ink, let me know how it comes out. I'm very happy with mine and actually surprised it was this easy. So thanks so much for joining me on this video, and until my next one, bye-bye. That's cute. Love it.